Yu-Gi-Oh can be an incredibly expensive game to play, but with a little patience, you can build a competitively viable deck without becoming a whale. Back in 2022, Konami released the Albaz Strike structure deck, which helped me get back into the game. 2 years later, it's still a solid way to get into the game while slowly building up its competitive power. Our plan is to go from this to this, a fully competitive build of the branded Despia strategy without breaking the bank. Only spending up to $15 a week buying singles, packs, and trading, we are going to prove that you can still have a good time with this game while playing branded on a budget. Hey everybody, my name is Cole, and welcome back to another episode of Branded on a Budget. We are back for episode 2 of Branded on a Budget, and today we're going to be upgrading our deck with a little bit of Despia power. Last time, our deck did pretty dang well as 3 structure decks, if I'm being honest. It's surprising how many things came up as much as it did, like the 3 Mirror Jades, as well as things like Branded and White. I would never expected Branded and White to pop up as frequently and as effectively as it did, to the point where I might even consider keeping it in the deck from here on out. We'll see. I've not done much with Branded and White until this, and so it's been a lot of fun to see what it can do. That said, there are some cards that, in my opinion, underperformed or have lived longer than they should be in our deck, even after 1 week. And we're going to go ahead and get rid of those right now, starting with our copies of Keeper of Dragon Magic. Now, this card, albeit, is a pretty darn good card in my opinion, especially for the deck. It works really well, being a dragon, as well as just obviously the fact that it can search out a branded fusion. That said, we've got a card that can replace that and do what it does, but maybe even better. We're also going to be dropping 3 copies of Pot of Extravagance. I honestly don't remember using them once in any of the duels, and I think we may have seen one once, but I think we use it as a discard. I don't love Pot of Extravagance, and from here on out, our extra deck is going to get a little bit more full, so it's better to not get rid of things that we may or may not need for our duels. And the last 2 main deck cards we're dropping are Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit and the Dark Kaiju. We're keeping 2 copies of each in our deck. Well, actually 1 copy of Radiant and 2 copies of Ghost Ogre. I don't love Ghost Ogre that much, as in my opinion. It's as a hand trap. I think Effective Healer is much better. And eventually we're going to be phasing out all hand traps as well as Kaijus. And I think the light kaiju comes up more to make Titaniclad, for example, with a higher level. And we need more light targets, which is also why we're keeping the light kaiju. And Ghost Ogre, like I said, I just don't think it performs as well as Effective Healer. So those are 8 main deck slots that we're dropping. We're going to be switching out for some new things. But before we do that, let's take a quick look at the stuff we're going to be dropping out of our extra deck. So if you remember, our extra deck was more or less just 3 copies of every single thing, except for we did have 1 Brigand, the Glory Dragon. We are dropping it. It can come up as a send target off of Mirror Jade, or even making it with a Mercurier. However, those are going to be pretty few and far between, so we're dropping it. Lubellion, we have 2 of them still in there. I don't think we'll end up only having 1 in our deck, so we definitely don't need 3, so I figured it was a safe drop. Sprind is another one that I don't know if we really need. Obviously, we're going to drop it later on, but hey, we'll keep the 1 in our extra deck for now and drop the 2nd copy. And then the 3rd copy of Titaniclad probably won't come up either, so we're going to drop it. So we can say goodbye to these, and as we get rid of these, we can say hello to our new cards that we're adding in. Let's start with our extra deck cards. We've got Masquerade, the Blazing Dragon. Now, Masquerade is just a super solid fusion target for the Despia side of your deck, and we're going to be adding a bunch of Despias, so I figured, hey, it just makes perfect sense. It fits in the deck, and eventually it might end up in our side deck in the future anyway, so why not start with it now? Especially because it's cheap, thanks to Rarity 2. We got Despia and Querites. So I went back and forth between Priscinian and Querites, and Querites actually does end up in our final version of the deck, so I figured might as well just jump on Querites right now. I don't have another copy of the ultra rare to throw into this deck as the lower rarity, so we're stuck with a Prismatic Secret rare for now. However, the Prismatic Secret's actually cheaper than the ultra rare, so go figure. But yes, Querites is great. It can drop our opponent's monsters' attacks to 0, which is really cool, and can come up and later on with Grand Guigno, we can cheat it out of the extra deck, and so on. Guardian Chimera is probably one of the greatest fusion monsters we can add to the deck at this point anyway. I think Chimera is great, and you'll see why, because we've got a sneaky little branded in red going to show up a little bit later. But yes, Chimera is incredible. We'll talk about that a little bit later. The last fusion monster we're adding is Rinbrum the Striking Dragon. Now, Rinbrum has its use cases. We can fuse and make it with a Mercurier or a kit, honestly, and those are potentials that we might honestly have to bring up sometimes. However, I do prefer sending it off of Mirror Jade so I can use its graveyard effect to special summon an Albaz from the grave and get a Super Poly on my opponent's turn. That said, I've noticed in testing that having an Albaz in grave without Quem in your deck is incredibly hard. I don't have Albaz in grave as much as I'd like to, and I'm still not sure about Rinbrum as of right now. So if we need to, it might just become one of our fusion targets rather than a send off of Mirror Jade. Next up, we've got our Despia package. We've got Ad Libitum of Despia, Dramaturge of Despia, 3 copies of Aluber the Jester, and 1 copy of Despian Tragedy. This is going to be our Despia package for right now. Obviously, 3 Alubers makes pretty much perfect sense. They search our branded fusion. Once again, I didn't have another copy of the Super Rare, so we're stuck with an Ultra Rare. However, it's still dirt cheap, so thank you again, Rarity Collection 2. Despian Tragedy is incredible. It can search us an Aluber, it can search us any other Despia we might need. Eventually, it can start searching us for Quem, so it's going to be a staple for our deck for the rest of the time that we are playing with it. Next up is Dramaturge. Dramaturge is interesting. It can come up. I don't know if I love it, and we might be swapping it for something potentially if we're lucky. We'll talk about that in just a second. For now, it's a Despia name that can do some fun little things here and there by fusing and special summoning itself back to the field. And lastly is Ad Libitum of Despia. Now, Ad Lib is incredible. Honestly, I really like Ad Lib, and I even run it in my current build of branded Despia, even with Quem. That said, like most people probably point out, once Quem comes out or once we get access to Quem, we don't necessarily need Ad Libitum, but I still really do like it. Now, if I were to change one thing about this, I might bump up my copies of Tragedy to like 2 or 3. I don't think it's a necessity, but it can be helpful. Just keep that in mind. But for now, Tragedy at 1, and we'll see what we can do. Last 2 cards, we've got a Foolish Burial, which will dump that copy of Tragedy so we can search for Aluber if need be, and our Branded in Red. Branded in Red is just an incredible card. As many of you probably know, it lets us fuse on our opponent's turns. Before we got Cartesia, we had Branded in Red, and this is what made us do some crazy things, like summon Guardian Chimera on our opponent's turn. So, all of these cards that we're adding doesn't really add up to $15. In fact, it's close to $8. It's not honestly that high. So, for today, I decided to buy a tin at my locals and then split up the packs so that we'd be able to, maybe if we're lucky, pull a copy of the Bestial Lubellion. If we get Lubellion, this deck just becomes that much better. I didn't realize how much I missed Lubellion until I didn't have it in my testing. So, like I said, this is maybe a $5 to $6 pack, and so I figured this will round us up to $15. And if we don't get a Lubellion, it is what it is. I mean, obviously, we don't always win. But if we get something like a Fenrir, we can trade that potentially for a Lubellion. If we get like a Destructive Daruma Cannon, I guess we've got a side deck card. Who knows? We'll see what we can get. Hopefully, we can be lucky. Let's go and crack it open. These mega packs are very interesting with how thick they are, that's for sure. Okay, let's go through everything. I'll try to point out anything that might be relevant. I honestly don't think they'll be much relevant. If they are, they're going to be in the Ultra or the Secret Rare slot. Starting up, we got a Psychic Rover. That's kind of an interesting looking dude. Can I swipe down? Libromancer Fire Burst. Predaplant Biblis. Could be interesting to use in Branded. If you want to see some Predaplant branded goodness, go check out Rev's card. Gem Knight Lady Rose Diamond. Therion Empress Alacia. Libromancer Bonded. Okay, Dogmatica Macabre. So this is our rare. I don't know what all the rare slots could be. However, Dogmatica Macabre won't be very useful to us. I think it goes rare, ultra, secret. I could be wrong. We'll just check the next one. If it's a super, then we'll know it's ultra, secret. Therion Duke Yule. So it is going to be super. So this is ultra, secret. And as a just in case, we'll put that one to the back. The other commons that we have are Scareclaw Alternative, Ninjutsu Art Notebook of Mystery, Ninjutsu Art of Dancing Leaves, Propagandake. It's an interesting thing I've never seen before. Samel Archfiends, and Libromancer Agent. Okay. So this should be our 2 ultras and 2 secrets. If we're lucky, then we've got a Bestial Lubellion. For our first ultra is a Maple Maiden. Our second ultra, Yoshihiru of the Aqua. Fluanderies and the Advent of Adventure for all you Flu players. And our last secret is Labyrinth. So, that's not great, but it is what it is. We spent a nice $5 to $6 on sadness. But hey, that's Yu-Gi-Oh! Welcome to the game if you haven't been playing already. Well, with that dud pack out of the way, that means that we aren't changing anything. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the deck profile, and then we'll do a test hand to show you roughly what I hope our combo can be. Okay, so this is our deck list. Sorry for the jank layout. I'm just doing this fast. I don't necessarily need to make it look super pretty for right now. But anyway, yes, we got 3 Aluber. We got which searches out Branded Fusion. We got 3 copies of Kit, which can also search Branded Fusion. 3 copies of Albaz, which in my opinion is great for going second or going first if you need a discard, because I love having Albaz in grave. We got 3 copies of Albion, which can also help us with that potentially, or maybe also just draw a card, which is great. Hopefully we don't see multiple of those in our opening hand. Our Despias, we got Dramaturge, Adlib, and Tragedy. I talked about them in a second ago. Adlib's great because it lets us get a second Mirror Jade effect or a first Mirror Jade effect depending on how our combo goes. We got 2 Mercurier, which is our hand trap, or potentially our fusion for Rinbrum. We got 3 copies of Branded Fusion, which is the no-brainer, 2 copies of Branded and White. Probably will eventually just be 1, then maybe 0, depending on how much I end up liking the card in the future. 1 copy of Branded and Red, which may also bump up to 2, depending on, like I said, with Branded and White. Our hand traps for now are Effect Veiler, and 3 copies of Effect Veiler, and 2 copies of Ghost Ogre, because those came in the structure deck, and we have space, so why not? 3 Kaijus for going second, as well as 3 copies of Dark Ruler for going second. Our branded spells and traps left over are 2 copies of Branded Lost, which could be bumped down to 1, especially if we had that Lubellion. And then our last trap is Branded Retribution, which helps us recur things from the graveyard, or play from the graveyard if our Aluber gets Effect Veilered or Impermed. Like I said, 3 Dark Ruler, 1 Call by the Grave, 1 Gold Sark, and 1 Foolish Burial. Foolish Burial and Gold Sark kind of serve the same function, especially now that Tragedy's in our deck, to get us a copy of Aluber, and then eventually get us to that copy of Branded Fusion, if we don't go completely interrupted up until that point. But anyway, without further ado, I guess real quick, here's the extra deck. It's a bit of a mess. We've got all of your typical standard Albaz fusions. We got 3 copies of Red Albion, 3 copies of Mirror Jade, 2 Titaniclad, 2 Lubellion, 1 Sprend. And then the new stuff, we've got 1 Masquerade, 1 Kueritus, 1 Guardian Chimera, and 1 Rindbrum, the Striking Dragon. So without further ado, let's shuffle all these up and get into our test hands. We'll cut the deck for good measure. Grab a drink of water so we can stay hydrated. And also keep my mouth a little bit wet so it doesn't sound bad. Hopefully, I'm recovering from a sickness, so that's probably why I sound slightly stuffy. Forgive me for that. Let's go ahead and see what our top 5 cards are. Where there's 2, and there's 1. So let's pretend like we're going first, regardless of what we get with our opening hand. First off, we've got 2 Kit, 1 Branded Fusion, 1 Aluber, and 1 Effect Veiler. This is an interesting hand, for sure. We got the branded fusion in hand, so we don't need to search it off with the Aluber or the kit, and we've got multiple copies of discard for the multiple copies of kit. Let's go ahead and activate, or normal summon the Aluber, the Jester of Despia. Activate its effect, searching for a copy of Branded Lost. There it is, right near the top. We grab the Branded Lost, add it to our hand. We won't shuffle just yet because we'll be going back in. Activate the Branded Lost, following up by activating the Branded Fusion. Branded Fusion will send a Despian Tragedy and a Fallen of Albaz to the graveyard. Now this is where our combo slightly differs from our previous combo last week where we were going with our light targets. Right now, because we've got the Tragedy, we're going to go for our dark target, which makes us a copy of Lubellion instead. From here, because we've got Branded Lost up, we want to sequence this up properly. We got Chainlink 1, Lubellion, Chainlink 2, Branded Lost, Chainlink 3, Despian Tragedy. Tragedy will search us a copy of Ad Libitum. Excuse me. Forgive me. Lubellion's effect does require discard for cost. We're going to send a copy of kit for cost. Now, Tragedy can search us that copy of Ad Libitum. There's the Ad Lib, add it to your hand. Branded Lost can search as a card. We don't necessarily need anything crazy. I mean, we could potentially go for Albion so that we could send the Albaz. This is where you really just gotta think. You know that next turn, if you do this right, you'll be able to use Branded in red and then get another search with Branded Lost for your next during your opponent's turn, and then you can search Mercurier that way. So with that train of thought, we are going to search the Albion and add it to our hand so that we can send the Fallen of Albaz from deck to grave. We don't need to shuffle just yet. Lubellion will continue with the fusion. The Albaz in our grave. Let's just do and it fuses with that, shuffles those back to make the Mirror Jade. That's resolved. So this is another interesting thing. I don't know why your opponent would keep an imperm or an effect failure this far into your turn instead of just using on the Aluber, but if for some reason you're worried that they might have that, you would want to go ahead and use your Mirror Jade effect immediately after everything is resolved so that they can't respond to your Mirror Jade by imperming it or effect failuring. If you're not worried, I guess it doesn't matter. We're going to use it right now anyway, so we'll go ahead and activate the effect, sending a copy of Albion to the graveyard and banishing our Aluber from our side of the field. Next, we can activate the Albion in our hand, sending a copy of Albaz, which is on top of the deck thanks to the Lubellion shuffle. Or, yeah, the shuffle back, but I hadn't shuffled the deck yet. We shuffle up our deck, set the Albion face down since it's going on the bottom. We'll cut right onto that and draw one, which happens to be a Dramaturge. Not a terrible draw, it's just something that really won't be used right now. There are things that we can do if we do decide to or do want to. We can do something like special summon the Spriggan's Kit, activate its effect, getting a copy of like Branded in white, or potentially Branded Retribution if you want that for protection or whatever. You would have to shuffle one of your cards back. If you got the Branded in white, you might use like the Dramaturge to make a fusion and potentially go into like a Masquerade or something like that. If you want the Branded Retribution, you might send back the Dramaturge. We'll just pretend like we're not going to do any of that. Just keep that in mind that that's something you could do if this was your exact situation. We'll just go ahead and proceed to end phase. End phase effect, we'll use Albion to set a copy of Branded in red to our side of the field, and then boom. So, as of right now, this is pretty weak, just because we are in the state that we are. Our Mirror Jade is vulnerable because it has its effect already used for this turn and for the next turn, and we essentially have to resolve our Branded in red if we want another Mirror Jade effect. However, if Branded in red does resolve, then we're golden. That said, we kind of want to activate Branded in red at the most opportune time. If we want to go into Chimera, they need to have stuff on board so we can destroy it. If we want to go into Masquerade, we could do that in the draw phase. That would be fine. If we want to do other stuff and so on. We only have one monster on board. So that means if we go into Chimera, they only need to have one thing on their field to destroy, and we've got multiple monsters in our hand to use as fusion material, which can work out. So we'll pretend that that's the case. Let's say they get to their main phase 1, they commit something to the board, and we decide we want to destroy it. Maybe it's a field spell or something. Like, say we're playing Runics. They activate Runic Fountain, and we want to destroy the Runic Fountain. We can go branded in red. Target, probably not the Albaz, because we want to keep that in the graveyard. We can target the Despian Tragedy, use the Dramaturge and the Ad Libitum in our hands alongside the Mirror Jade, banish him, and immediately summon the Guardian Chimera. Now, after that resolves, we get a couple trigger effects. We got our Guardian Chimera can trigger, our Ad Libitum can trigger, and so can our Dramaturge. Dramaturge can special summon itself back, Ad Libitum can target and special summon, in this case we're going to target the Mirror Jade and special summon, and Guardian Chimera can destroy cards based on how many we used on the field to fuse, in this case 1, and then draw cards based on how many cards we used in hand to fuse, in this case 2. So we'll go Guardian Chimera Chainlink 1, we'll go Ad Libitum Chainlink 2, and Dramaturge Chainlink 3. You can do some chain blocking here to chain block your Guardian Chimera. Since we've got Branded Lost on board, they can't respawn. I always just mess up this exact phrasing. Yes, your opponent cannot activate cards or effects after a fusion summon. So this is the window that they cannot respawn. And Chainlink 4 can be Branded and Lost, searching us that Mercurier that we wanted last turn, but we ended up going for the Albaz Engrave, which gets us a lot of beneficial stuff. So this one Branded in red gets us a lot of stuff. If our Branded in red gets negated, then we're kind of dead. We're kind of dead on the water, no doubt. So we grab the Mercurier off of the Branded Lost search. Dramaturge can special itself. Ad-lib specials the Mirror Jade. Guardian Chimera pops something on their or we first draw 2, and then Chimera will pop something on their board. Keep in mind that if they were able to respawn, they can Ash Blossom your Chimera, and you also do not get the destruction on their side of the field. That's one of those small little things that can come up, and it is very annoying when it does come up. So we've got a pretty stacked hand at this point. We've got 2 hand traps thanks to the way we drew with the effect failure, and we've got some other fun things we can do thanks to the way we've got our board set up. Mirror Jade is live again, so it's not a hard once per turn. So let's pretend we activate Mirror Jade, sending our Renbrum for cost to non-targeting banish one of their monsters. Next time they commit something to the board, we can banish our Renbrum, special summon our Albaz to the field, immediately do Albaz effect, sending some card to the graveyard. This is kind of fun. You can send, or actually it's a discard, so I guess you don't get the effect of Tragedy, but it doesn't necessarily matter. Then Albaz can fuse into whatever you may want. Whether it be a Titaniclad, another Albion, a Lubellion, whatever you have access to, essentially a Sprint potentially. That comes up more often than not, especially on your opponent's turn. And my favorite thing to do is if I don't have the Mirror Jade on board, but I do have the Renbrum Engrave, I banish the Renbrum, special the Albaz, use one of their extra deck monsters to make another Mirror Jade. So endless possibilities as long as our Branded in red does not get negated. If this card gets negated or stopped in any way, we're kind of SOL, aren't we? And that is mostly thanks due in part because we just don't have everything yet. But it is what it is. This deck is still incredibly powerful even without. Basically, what I've been learning since starting up this little series is that we are currently playing Branded as it was played in 2022, with modern ideas such as 3 Albion, and also playing against modern decks. And back in 2022, Branded Despia was really, really powerful. I don't know if it was ever tier 1, but it was pretty dang high up there right before tier limit came out, so yeah. So if you have any other questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. Or if you'd like to, you can go searching for some Branded Despia 2022 combos if you like. There are plenty of different things you can do. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into our locals and play some games. So the first game I got for you is against Trap Tricks. I start my opening hand with Dark Rule No More, Ghost Ogre, Dramaturge of Despia, Fallen of Albaz, and Called by the Grave. And I lost the die roll, so of course the Trap Trick goes first. They start by normal summoning Myrmelio, grabbing a trap, the Holotea. They link into Sarah, They special summon the Arachnocampa thanks to having a Traptrix on field, and then used Sarah's effect to get another trap. They grab a second Holotea, setting a card, which was a Holotea, so they could activate it the turn if they sent a normal trap, which was the other Holotea. So unfortunately for them, I had to use 2 Holoteas to get it out, but hey, here they are. They do another trap, special summon, Traptrix, special summon, and then they Xyz into Rafflesia, and they pass over to me with no back row, which was really, really lucky for me. I activate Dark Ruler no more, so that Rafflesia is basically done. I go Albaz, discard Drometers to fuse the Rafflesia with my Albaz to make Mirror Jade, and I top deck the branded fusion. So we are golden. We are winning here. It is too easy. We send some monsters to make a Lubellion. We do Lubellion effect, sending the Callby because our branded fusion did not get Ash Blossomed, so we could fuse one more time. I make a Masquerade because I already have the Mirror Jade on board, and since I've not have an Albion in Grave, I wanted to use Mirror Jade to get the Albion in Grave, banish the Sarah, and since I use Dark Ruler no more, I can't attack. So I set the branded in red in my end phase and pass back to my opponent. My opponent draws for their turn. Normal summons Pudica, which searches for the Traptrix field spell. They activate the field spell. They go ahead and link the Pudica off for the Traptrix Sarah. And on the summon, I decided chain branded in red by targeting the ad libitum of Despia in my hand, or in my graveyard, to add to hand, and then fuse. Shout out to the new cards. Having branded or in red is really, really clutch. Anyway, they respond to Holotea by special summoning a Pudica back to the field. I fuse Lubellion, Mirror Jade, and Adlib to make Guardian Chimera. They activated their Pudica effect. Chainlink 1 was Pudica, Chainlink 2 was Guardian Chimera, and Chainlink 3 was the ad libitum to special summon the Mirror Jade back to my board. My Guardian Chimera effect goes off and I destroy some stuff, and then the Pudica gets their effect as well, banishing the Masquerade, which is obviously good for them so that they're able to not worry about any burn damage. They link away into Sarah one more time. It's their last one, so I only have one more left to deal with. Right here, my opponent did mess up a little bit. They activated Holotea again, which shouldn't have happened because they've already activated it during this turn. However, it's whatever. Like you learn. We talked about it later anyway, so we're good. Anyway, they keep going. They end up making another Rafflesia, and I effect Veiler at some point. I think it was the Sarah that I effect Veilered. I activate the Mirror Jade to banish their Rafflesia by sending the Rinbrum. On my turn, I have the branded in white so that I can do another fusion summon by banishing the Albaz from my grave, the Albion from my grave to make a Titaniclad. And I believe this is game right here, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, it definitely is. They got nothing left. Their set trap, I believe is Floodgate. Gravedigger's Trap Hole, my bad, not Floodgate. So, they could have activated the Gravediggers, I think, on the branded in white, but, I mean, that was pretty much it. That is the game. Moving on to the next game. Okay, the next game I have is a best of 3 against Tenpai Dragons. I start with 2 copies of branded in white, 1 Springin's Kit, 1 Fallen of Albaz, and 1 Ghost Ogre, which isn't the greatest. I opt to go first. I believe I won the die roll, but I opt to go first even though I know we're playing Tenpai. I normal summon Kit, go Kit effect, it gets impermed. I go branded in white, fusing the Albaz and the Kit to make a Lubellion, and that also got impermed. So, that pretty much ends my turn right on the spot. They go ahead and activate the Magnuma in their hand so they can banish the Fallen of Albaz and special summon. They activate Sangan Summoning, and I Ogre it because I know what kind of shenanigans that card can do. Granted, I didn't have any responses for the rest of the turn anyway, so it didn't really matter. But neither did they. They set a card, and they crash our monsters together. I draw an Albaz, which is not good enough. So I decide we should go to game 2. Now, game 2 is slightly interesting. I do need to preface this. At one point, I didn't understand the cards that were on the board. It's definitely on me. I thought it was one thing or other. We'll get to it in a second, and I will explain what happened then. But basically, this game 2 is essentially nullified. I just still wanted to show it because it does have some good moments here and there. Anyway, my opening hand is the Dark Kaiju, Foolish Burial, Branded Fusion, Dark Ruler No More, and Branded Lost. I have my opponent go first because they're on Tenpai, and I am a bit of a board breaker version of Branded. They activate Sangden Kaimen to special the Pydra. The Pydra effect to get the Sangan Summoning, which searches for the Chandra, and they discard the Nibiru for the cost. They special the Chandra. They link away their 2 dragons for hieratic spheres. They set one thing, and then they pass over to me because that's a Tenpai board going first. I have the Kaiju, so I Kaiju over their hieratic spheres, and I activate the Foolish Burial, sending the Despian Tragedy. Everything is going very, very nicely for me. My Tragedy searches an ad-lib, I activate the Branded Lost, and boom, here it is, Rivalry of the Warlords. The moment I saw this, I assumed it was there can be only one, which is obviously not what it is. It's Rivalry. So, from here on, you're going to see me play as if I'm playing under there can only be one, even though it's Rivalry, and we correct it later on. So I go Branded Fusion, I make the Albion, Branded Lost searches me in the Mercurier, I do Albion Fusion to banish Albaz in itself to make a Mirror Jade, because, like I said, I think I'm under there can only be one, not Rivalry. I go Mirror Jade effect, banishing my Kaiju, and I swing in for 3,000. I go to the end phase, I use my Albion to set Branded in red, because once again, I think it's there can be only one, and I think that maybe I might be able to make a Guardian Chimera. They draw, it's their turn, which is standby, or draw phase, because I know Sangan Summoning's on board, and I want to do all my stuff before then. I activate Branded in red, but they top deck the Magnamut, and we're able to target the Despian Tragedy in my graveyard, banishing it, so that Branded in Raise fizzles. Their Magnamut gets a search in the end phase, which is going to be the Pydra, of course, because it's Tenpai, and that's what Tenpai does. And right here, we start realizing that I'm cheating. Isn't it one of each? One type of monster. Oh, shoot. Okay, then we do fix it. And this is looping all the way back to where it would have been and what I could have done instead. So, I use my Albion effect to make a Titanic Lad, which is another dragon. And I crash my I attack Titanic Lad into the Kaiju, and I attack directly with Albion. They summon their Mirror Jade, ditching the Tragedy once again, and they have to pass back to me, but they do add the Pydra at the end of their turn. On my turn, I have another Branded Fusion, so I activate it to make a Lubellion. I search for an Albion with Branded Lost, I activate Albion in hand to special summon it, and that would actually be game, because I didn't have any follow-up. I probably would have left the Kaiju on the board if I didn't know that they had the Magnamut in their hand, like because of the whole way we rewound everything. But regardless, I still would have won that even if I wasn't cheating, which is ironic that I probably had a better play if I wasn't cheating than if I was. Regardless, it doesn't really matter. We just decided to nullify that game and go into another game. So I lost game 1. The game you just saw wasn't something we even counted, and then now this is technically our game 2, where I opened an Albion, a Gold Sark, a Dramaturge, an Effect Failure, and a Springan's Kit. So, this is very susceptible to hand traps. Hopefully he doesn't have anything. Let's see what he does. He normal summons the Pydra, and I Effect Failure it. He's got Pot of Prosperity, though, which searches, or not searches, but excavates a Ash, an Effect Failure, Sangan Summoning, another Effect Failure, a Chandra, and a Nibiru. He thinks about adding the Chandra, but he decides to add the Sangan Summoning, which is definitely the play. Sangan Summoning can then go ahead and search for the Chandra. Chandra can then special summon itself to the board. He's going first, by the way, because we took it as like my game 1 loss, and so I chose for him to go first again, if that makes any sense. Anyway, he banishes the Ogre in his graveyard that he discarded for the search for Chandra to summon the Magnamut. He uses the other 2 dragons on board to make spheres, and he sets 1 card and passes over to me. I draw for my turn, and I activate Dark Ruler No More. And so he's got nothing left on board, essentially. I Albion effect in hand, dumping the Branded Retribution from my deck to get the 1 draw. I go Gold Sark, sending the Mercurier. Mercurier effect goes off, searches me the Albaz. This was a huge decision for me from the kit to the Albaz. I normal summon the Albaz, but it doesn't even matter because either way I would have been stopped in my tracks. He uses Forbidden Droplet to negate my Albaz, which essentially ends my turn right then and there, giving him the game win. Many things were learned during these two duels, and we'll talk about that right now. So we're back from our games, and like I just said, we learned a ton. There was a ton of little things that I've realized that we need to upgrade and prepare for so that we can keep our deck going and not just lose to 2 interruptions. I will say Chimera came in clutch. That worked very, very well. At my sneak peek, I played my full-on branded, and Chimera was clutch there as well, I will say. Rinbrim did not come up. Neither did Querites, although Rinbrim's nice to send. Masquerade did come up, which was a nuisance to the trap tricks, as you saw, and everything else is pretty much the same. However, I will say the surprising star of this week was Dark Ruler No More. I would never have guessed that this card was going to be the star. I normally go for things like Forbidden Droplet. However, I do know a lot of the professional players, I guess you can call them. Think people like Pack. He's playing Dark Ruler over Forbidden Droplet in his build of branded Despia. So I know that it's a phenomenal card, and the fact that I've been top decking it like crazy doesn't help. It makes me like it even more. So this may become our premier board breaker. We may not even look into getting Forbidden Droplet at some point. However, if we do, Forbidden Droplet's not terribly expensive thanks to all the rarity collection stuff. The other thing that I loved a ton was normal summoning Albaz. You saw me do it a lot, was normal summon Albaz and fuse with their monsters. And that's just super, super clutch. And as you saw against the Tenpai player, we can even... Well, I guess we didn't see this, but one thing against Tenpai that if you are facing Tenpai a lot that you want to keep in mind is that you can set your Fallen of Albaz to your side of the field as your normal summon, and then contact fuse all of their dragons into Albalenitus. I don't have one of those in my current deck, my Branded on a budget, but in my actual deck, I do. I do run the Albalenitus for that very reason, and if I ever need to, I can side it out for a Masquerade, which is in my side deck. But yes, Albalenitus is a contact fusion, so keep that in mind. If you have a lot of Tenpai players at your locals, you can set your Albaz and fuse away their entire board. Super, super great, phenomenal card. I highly recommend it. It's also stupid cheap. But yeah, the deck's honestly doing good when it can go off. But it can't go off every time, and it's a little difficult because of that. As you saw against the Tenpai player, because it's Tenpai has so many hand traps, we lost to 2 infinite impermanences, and in the other game we lost to a Forbidden Droplet. We literally could not do anything else because everything that we could do was cooked. So, what I'm thinking for episode 3 is to start building our deck in a way that we don't lose to 1 interruption. We can do more things rather than just branded fusion and hope for the best. I mean, obviously we tried branded and white at one point, but the Lubellion board's what got stopped. And so, without further ado, we're going to quickly glance at one card that is going to make our... I guess you got a sneak peek of another one, but one card that will absolutely make our next episode is Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous. Thank you to Terminal Revenge for making this card very, very cheap and easily obtainable for this challenge. This card's going to help us dodge a lot of those hand traps like Imperm and Effect Failure. Of course, Ash is still a problem, but not only does this dodge all of those effects, those Imperms and Veilers and so on, it helps us continue to play. In that one where our Albaz was negated from the Forbidden Droplet, if we happen to have a Cartesian hand, we could special summon it and then use it to fuse. So it's just that much more. And yeah, that's probably going to be what next time is going to be about. But before we go today, I do want to talk about some more, I guess you could call them budget options that you could try out. They're very, very good in different ways, and I use a lot of them, and especially one in particular I definitely use in my deck currently. I main deck it even. So keep this all in mind as we go forward, that there are options you can use. If you'd like to try them out, you can. We may end up trying some of them in our deck as well. But like I said, we're going to focus on that Cartesia. But anyway, without further ado, I remember back in the day having Incredible Ecclesia as one of my light targets before I had Lubellion, before I had Cartesia, before I had Quem. Ecclesia is not terrible in the branded deck. You can tribute it and special summon an Albaz from your deck and then use Albaz effect to fuse. It's more like it's like kind of like a super poly. Yeah, it's like a super poly. It doesn't get two of your opponent monsters, but you do get at least one. And I guess if you're playing a dragon deck, you can contact fuse with Albaz without using its effect. Regardless, though, Incredible Ecclesia is not a terrible option. It does have some synergies. I will say I think the price of this card is starting to go up. I think it's close to $3 or $4 now. I don't know off the top of my head, but I think that it might be. So keep that in mind if you do want another light target or potentially another normal summon in dire situations. Anyway, next up, we got our 3 fusion deployments. This is definitely something that we will most likely be adding next episode. But even before Cartesia, it's not a bad option, especially if you're going the board breaker route by revealing an Albaz fusion, special summoning your Albaz, and then fusing away. It's just another super poly, very much so like that Ecclesia was, the Incredible Ecclesia. I'm going to save this one for last because it's one of my favorites. Next up, we've got Despia Theater of the Branded. Despia Theater of the Branded is more or less a free fusion once per turn. Cartesia definitely does this job better, in my opinion. But if you don't have access to Cartesia, this card is probably even cheaper, although I think Cartesia is 10 cents at this point. Regardless, it's not a bad option. And more often than not, people don't tend to get rid of your field spells unless they actually interrupt them. And this doesn't interrupt them. And another card that will almost certainly be added into the deck, maybe next time, maybe not next time, is Branded in High Spirits. This card is phenomenal. It's so good. You need more dragons typically in your deck to play it, but you don't necessarily need them. It does help unbrick hands with a lot of dragons, such as your Albions and later on your Bestial Sereners and Bestial Lubellion. But regardless, even without, Branded in High Spirits is still a great card. It's a lot of recursion. It's a free discard every turn if you need it. And it's just super good. But this early on, I just don't know if we absolutely need it. However, don't overlook Branded in High Spirits. And if you're playing with a bigger or a more built branded deck and you're not playing High Spirits, I don't know what you're doing. The last up that we have is the Dragoon package. The Dark Magician and Red Eyes Dragoon. We got the Brick Magician and I think the once per turn Omni Negate. This is a super solid option. I personally run it in my fully built branded deck still. You saw the Dragoon pop out a second ago. Like I said, I still do run it. I think it's very good. It catches people off guard. They don't know what to do when Dragoon hits turn 3 or 4 or 5. So when you're getting more into the grind games with branded, and you pop a Dragoon out, your opponents just countless times they've been like, oh my goodness, Dragoon, what do I do with this? How do I out this? They've ran out of their resources at that point, so they just don't know how to out the Dragoon, and at that point it makes me win the game. Don't sleep on Dragoon, especially budget players, because of Rarity Collection making Dragoon so dang cheap, and you can get a Dark Magician in the garbage cans of most of your locals because there's too many of them in this world. Anyway, the last card that we have is Brightest Blazing Branded King. This card is absolutely phenomenal. It's a common from Cyberstorm Axis. Yeah, Cyberstorm Axis. Get yourself a copy of this card. I probably will be adding it next episode. If I don't, it's because I couldn't find an extra one. I didn't want to take it out of my main branded deck. But regardless, it's a cheap card. It's incredible. It's a free negate of anything that you need to deal with. Even if your opponent just activates like their own branded fusion, you can negate their branded fusion. It's insane. It's crazy good card. Look into it if you have not. It's a good set instead of Branded in Red if you don't have a target in your grave like a Despia or an Albaz, and you have an Albion in grave that needs to set something. This is a super solid option to set instead of Branded in Red if need be. And if you open it and you have a branded fusion on board, then like, hey, you're still winning. It's super good. But yes, that pretty much does it. That was our episode 2. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys have enjoyed. Next time, we're going to get Albaz, his goth girlfriend, into the picture. I don't know why I do this.